Hello, class. Welcome to week two for Management 220. Again, my apologies for not being able to be physically in attendance, but I wanted to get the lecture material out and have you guys entertained and to go through the essential material that we're going to go over. Because week two is an important week. It's specifically about the risk assessment and mitigation plans that goes with contingency and preparing for the worst, so to speak. Because as I discussed last week, risk aversion and risk mitigation and just being prepared. Preparedness is a very high priority of project management in general, but just want to be prepared for when any type of situation happens. So not utter chaos breaks out, or people are just running around with like the chickens with their heads cut off, or people are just seemingly on fire, so to speak. But anyway, the most important thing about that is, like I say, is preparing for it and actually having a general discussion of all the things that can go wrong and how you would prepare, plan for it as far as either doing something that's more proactive or reactive depending on the situation at hand. So the areas we're going to talk about is just like most essentially starting with the planning for risk to happen, the managing of it, and then estimating it, and actually going through the process that it can happen when it comes to that situation. And the one thing I told you guys last week, and I'll reaffirm it this week, is that I can guarantee one thing about project management: things will go wrong. You can't always predict exactly what's going to go wrong, but I can guarantee you that things will not go exactly how they were planned, and you'll have to make diversions and have a contingency and make adjustments on the fly when it comes to that situation. But if you have a risk aversion plan and you are prepared for this, and you have something proactively in place so you can react really quickly or just make a subtle change to it, it makes the project seamlessly fix the issue as far as costing less time and money and resources in order to make something happen or to get past a pain point or a sticking point, so to speak. Now, planning for risk, like I said, problems happening in your project, you can just plan that it's going to happen, but you want to try to get more granular and specific on exactly what situation is going to happen. And the four main strategies that go into planning for risk and the main strategies to handling it starts with risk avoidance, which is eliminating any specific threat or risk, usually by eliminating its cause. As far as if you're able to get rid of things on the project that could potentially cause this situation to happen, just eliminating that in general. And so that's the easiest and most agreeable thing to do, but not necessarily the most feasible a lot of times. Risk acceptance is accepting that consequences should a risk occur, meaning that it's something that's going to be there, and you just know that if you're taking a risk or you're utilizing contractors, vendors, or working in an adverse climate or something of that nature, that's you accept that there's going to be a risk, and you just prepare for whatever the consequences could potentially be in that situation, whether it's a vendor or contractor falling through because you're using them for the first time. It's you're doing an outdoor-based project in a treacherous weather type situation, things of that nature that can come up. Risk transference, which is pretty much just shifting the consequences of risk and responsibility first management to a third party. This is a lot of times just hiring an outside entity to handle a certain project or portion a portion of the project. Vendors, contractors, things of that nature. That's good risk transference as far as you're shifting the consequences or the issues as far as the risk of that project portion to someone else. Now, granted, that still falls on you as the project manager to solve the issue if that situation has happened. And let's say the contractor vendor falls through or doesn't make do with what they're expected to, or the product or whatever they were contracted to do comes back not exactly to specs and doesn't do what you need it to, etc. That's going to be, of course, a thing that you'll have to accept and go from and make adjustments to. But for the most part, a lot of times you can offload a lot of risk as far as the situation is concerned if you're worried about it in-house. And then, of course, there's risk mitigation, which is reducing the impact of risk and reducing the probability of something occurring. Meaning this is more proactive and setting up a proactive and reactive plan based on issues and situations that can happen. And you use these four strategies and four kind of structures to try to mitigate as much risk and situations and bad things happening within the project that you can. Like I said, it's going to happen, but you want to try to mitigate it so it doesn't scrap the whole project or cause a significant amount of time, money, and resources to allocate to fix whatever said issue or risk that pops up doing that. And so you definitely take a lot of time to plan, to idea it, to actually make a proposal as far as how you're going to handle it, what's going to work, etc., etc. And then you just kind of like figure out if you're going to accept it and just kind of deal with it. Like a good situation I can, or I guess like a scenario I could tell you about is if you're doing an outdoor project and let's say there's going to be a hurricane or a monsoon or something of that nature that it's going to potentially cause havoc to that project. That it may or may not be a situation that will happen during the course of the project, but it's something that might be in the situation. That's just accepting, because there's nothing really you can do you can't stop bad weather. I mean, you could plan for it, prepare for it, try to schedule around it, but if the project has to be outdoors and there's no way of really like protecting it from the elements or the weather in general, then you're kind of SOL in that situation. You just have to kind of accept it and kind of work around it and hope for the best. As opposed to if you know that something is going to be, let's say if you know that you have a certain part of the project that's super critical and you're not sure that you have the staff or the expertise on hand to do it, then you could take that risk of your staff not being able to put that project portion up to snuff, and you can bid it out and have a very well-established contractor or vendor that's known for whatever you need done to take care of that, so you can kind of rest at ease. I always kind of make the scenario just to kind of also give you an idea, because I use weather for like acceptance, but I would talk about using like as far as accounting, finance, and things of that nature. When I was going through my dissertation portion, and many times in my I guess private sector life when I was actually working in corporate, when I had to have statistical analysis or statistical data, backed up and put through, I mean, granted, I have the knowledge base to put that stuff together, but let's be honest, it's a pain in the ass, and nobody likes doing it. And not to mention, I'm not an accountant, and also not a statistician. That's not my forte. That's not my expertise. And so, to, I guess, make sure that there is no bias, no issues, no problems, no miscalculations on my end, I would always outsource and bid that out to a statistician, an accountant, a financier, some financial person, in order to give me a very structured, accurate, and expertise opinion on the information that I was accumulating. So whatever research I did in a workplace, or even when I did it during my dissertation for my my giant dissertation paper for my doctorate, I outsourced the statistical work to either entities, people, or companies that were known for doing that work, that had the proper software, that had the proper expertise, that were very critical, but also had a very high accuracy level, so that way I can, whenever the findings came back, I could present those in a manner, meaning that these are definite numbers. These aren't something that I just kind of like threw together, or I did last night as far as crunching for you. These were accurately put together and put in place. And so that kind of transference just takes the risk off me messing up the statistical analysis. I mean, what's the risk of, you think about it from like a mitigation standpoint, we'll go over the analysis form next, but you think about it from like a status portion or a statistical portion, or a quantitative study type situation, where you might be able to do it, of course, with the proper training and software, but what's the chances of you making errors or messing it up compared to outsourcing it to a statistician or a company that just caters to that specific amount? It's going to be a bit higher. The risk of you doing it's going to be, and having mistakes, is going to be much higher than if you bid it out and have somebody else do it. So that's a good transference there. And like I said, when it comes to critical parts of projects, it's really good, and it can be a very, very stress relieving situation to offload those situations or areas that are super critical, and you have a risk, and it could be a risk of that part of the project not being done correctly. But again, that's also, there's an acceptance that goes into it, because if that contractor, vendor, company does make a mistake or doesn't deliver on what they're supposed to, then that's a whole different issue that you have to kind of mitigate and go from. So it's kind of like sharing risk along many platforms, but going off of it. But the key thing is you want to be very, very proactive with thinking about all the things that can go wrong and the risk that goes with it. Now, This week specifically, we're going over the analysis portion, and the assignment you're going to be doing for me, you're going to be creating one of these risk matrices specifically for the situation at hand that you're going through. Now, when you're estimating risk, the key things you start with is accountability, as far as who's going to be actually in charge of this specific situation, and if something was to happen. Another thing that you want to make sure to do when you're actually building out a risk assessment is you want to have the right people in the room, because if the project has multiple moving parts and goes into a bunch of different stuff, let's say hypothetically if you're building, let's say, a video game, right? You're going to need programmers, artists, you're going to need designers, you're going to need potentially marketers and salespeople, a huge plethora of different expertise and areas. And so if you're trying to mitigate risk in the overall project, you're going to have more than just one type of individual or one type of workforce in there making these situations that can happen, and trying to plan for it. So you want to have the right people in the room to make these decisions, and also think outside of exactly the norm of what could happen, but the extremes and the different things that they might encounter, whether it's internally, program, software, hardware-wise, just market trends, all that different stuff that goes into, oh no, there's another game that came out that's just like ours, and we have to deviate some way, shape, or form. There's a bunch of stuff that goes in that portion of that. And then risk affects like all functions of the project at hand, so you always should care. And this should be one of the initial things you do during the planning phase. Like right after you set up your gold card, right after you start building out your rudimentary outline of how this is going to work, and you start getting into the idea of what your work breakdown structure is going to be in the WBS, which we'll go over next week's in a lot more detail. You want to start building out your risk assessment to go with it, because as you're coming up with an outline, kind of itemizing all the situations that can go wrong, all the stakeholders and the customers and etc., you start to figure out exactly what's going to be aligned in the risk of anything that's going to be happening within this project. And the more moving parts in a project, or the more things that have to get done, bells and whistles, additional employees, different event coordinating, whatever it goes into, more risk is going to be added into the list. And so there's no right or wrong as far as how many should be within your itemized assessment, but you should have a lot because let's be honest, if your project has a bunch of employees, deadlines, timelines, it's attached to software and hardware that has to work and maintain it, there's a bunch of variables that can play into that. And so remember that risk is reserved in factor enterprise issues like sibling issues, sweeping regulations and laws. I always bring up the idea that extreme weather is one of the easiest ones to say that you can't really plan for unless it's a 7-day forecast. But as far as starting a project and finishing a project, weather within that time duration, if it's like a 6-month or a year project, is not going to be much of a factor, because you don't really, not that it will be a factor, it's that you don't have any controls over that, right? Especially if it's an outdoor-based project or something that could be in an extreme weather area that you're building something or creating something like Florida or like the Hurricane Alley areas in the Midwest. But you want to make sure that you plan for it, but there's not really much you can do for it besides dealing with it. Anyway, the other one is also what can also be detrimental to certain projects is if you're working in a highly regulated area, whether it's real estate, it's construction, it's education, it's the medical field, legal based stuff. Even tax law, it changes consistently. So regulations and laws will adjust based on the state governments, the federal governments, year to year. Their quarterly, annually, whenever meetings are going to be taking place. A lot of times things get kind of adjusted. And so you have to be prepared for that as well. Like hypothetically, if all of a sudden you're working in the medical field and you're creating a specific medical device, and all of a sudden certain regulations come down from the government saying that this has to meet certain code standards, and all of a sudden the production has to completely change based on it, that's a pretty significant amount of change. And same with legality-wise. If let's say what was it? I forget which states. A few states have decriminalized marijuana charges, so that way people can get them get out of jail and actually get them expunged off their record. That's a pretty extravagant regulation change. That's if you were a legal team or a law firm or even a policing unit, that would make your adjustments quite significant as far as how you're going to handle yourself, or how you're going to cater, what your customer base is going to look like, and etc. Then go over that. But essentially, you create a giant risk matrix, and you figure out exactly, you give it like a severity level, which we're going to walk through. I'm going to walk you through it before the end of this lecture. And you figure out like who's going to own the risk, as far as like, is that something you and your team own? Is something that you're going to outsource to a third party because you're effective at it? You're going to assign it to a certain individual on your team, a certain department of the company, etc. And then what are you going to do about it, as far as either mitigating it, dealing with it, and then also like when you're actually going to trigger this to happen. Because a lot of times you can put a lot of proactive triggers into it, like something really basic as far as, you know, power outages. So you might have some battery reserves, UPCs, and things of that nature kind of laced around, and surge protectors laced around your organization just in case, right? That's something you put proactively in the beginning of the phase, so that way if it does happen, there's that preventative manner in there. Sometimes there is those preventative measures, but sometimes there's not, and sometimes you have to do reactive measures, which is, if somebody is to get, like, say, hurt on the job, so to speak, you have a procedure in place for how to deal with that situation. Granted, you do as much as you can to mitigate that from actually happening proactively, but if it's bound to happen or will happen, you want to have some kind of reactive measures, like, okay, this has happened, these are the steps and things that we're going to take after the fact to make sure that this is mitigated, and that the problem is solved in a much quicker process. Things of that nature. And hopefully you all can still follow me and go where you need to. I don't lose you on it. But now, estimated managing risk is like what you're going to kind of build off of is, like I said, the metrics. You're going to build off of that and create kind of like grids of how likely and capable things are to happen. Because like I said, when you're building out risk metrics, it doesn't necessarily have to be, it can be really extreme, and it can be very, very granular as far as like the very specifics of it. But you can also plan for grand things. Like I said, you plan for earthquakes, floods, severe bad weather. Like, these might be things that are very low on the possibility list, but as far as like to the project, it could be catastrophic. So you still want to have these things listed because they're there, and you want your risk matrix to be as complete as humanly possible. But you're going to have a likelihood and then like a certainty that something's going to kind of happen versus the very minimal or improbable. So as far as like, let's say someone getting sick in your workforce and having to take a significant amount of time off, is that something that's highly likely? It probably won't. I don't know if it's going to be super highly likely, but there's a good chance that might actually happen, that people are going to call out sick, or you're going to have some attrition during your project management situation, and your project management duration, and your timeline. So you're definitely going to want to like plan for that. Is that going to be a catastrophic thing to your project to have some attrition or to have someone call out sick? No, but it is something you need to plan for and avert when it actually happens. And then when it comes to that, kind of like deviates into making good decisions, which I always love the drunken picture of the person trying to jump over a bunch of his friends, knowing it's going to probably end in a lot of humor and pain from on their aspect and their side. But bad decisions make good stories. That's cool. Yeah, that's very fun. They're very fun to talk about much later after the fact. I'm sure we all have good and fun things we can discuss that way. But as far as, you want to make sure that you're making good decisions when you're going through your project and project management in general. And so when you're going through making good decisions, a good checklist of questions to ensure this is, first you want to start with is what problem is the core of the decision, as far as like what problem am I trying to solve. Like we talked about, the gold card is really kind of like sifting through everything that's out there and figuring out if this is really the problem that we're trying to solve, or going from anything else that needs to from there. And then also we discussed, how long will this decision actually impact the project? How deep is the impact? Is this something that's kind of like surface level, minuscule? It might cause us to lose a delay or an impact for a few hours, or is this something that will pretty much like significantly cripple the project for months? And so you want to make sure that you kind of assess that. If you're wrong, like what's the actual impact or cost? Is this going to be something that's, I picked the wrong flavor of cupcakes, so people might not be as happy? Or is it something pretty extravagant that I decided to use the wrong materials, so now we have to reorder, and it's going to cost us another additional like $30,000 to make this fix and to get it done, and also another few months to make it work. Is there a window of opportunity that you have to actually make these decisions? Is this something that you can take some more time and articulate and get an expert opinion or do some more research on, or is there something that you have to make a decision on very quickly, otherwise a deal's off the table, or a vendor or contractor don't have the availability for it, or you lose certain personnel for a while, or you just miss a window of time depending on what you need to. Have you made the right decisions before? It's okay to realize that you're out of your depth. So when it comes to, I said, like when I've talked about to you guys before last week, is that project managers aren't always an expert in every field that they're going to be project managing in. You might take over a very technical team or technologically savvy team that has much more knowledge base in that specific realm than you do. And in various ways of that nature, you could take over physicians, accountants, programmers, dentists, whatever. Doesn't mean that you actually know how to do their work, or that you're going to take over for one of them if they call out sick or just decide to quit. But you still need to know the decision-making process to go with it. But if, as far as like the knowledge base, if it's something very intricate that you don't have a knowledge base for, it's okay to realize that you don't, and to ask for help, guidance, or have somebody else make that decision based on their expertise, experience, and understanding, because it might be more vast than yours. And I know this, we've talked about it last class, that this is a leadership trait of understanding your own limitations and asking for help and not being too prideful to ask for that type of guidance and push, even if it is from one of your subordinates or from somebody that's in the same field as you. So, like I said, make sure you're doing that and you're doing okay. Who has an expert perspective? Is that one of your employees? Is that somebody else in the organization? Is it somebody you have to actually go out there and find? And so that way you can actually, make sure that you're making the right thing. Another situation that might come up is, this really even my decision to make? If this is something that, pushes the budget higher or pushes the timeline longer, this might not be something that you can actually decide on your own. This might be something that you do have to get approval and actually like ask for additional guidance and questions to from either your superiors or different part of the organization, or the investor or financier that's putting it on that you might be contracted through. And then the last one, of course, for making decisions, whose approval do I need? I mean, a lot of times when we become accustomed and understanding of our hierarchical system and the superiors that are above us, a lot of times we already know if they're going to approve or disapprove of certain things that we may ask of them or want to do in a current situation. So we might be working with a very frugal executor or financier that's like, no, that's the dollar amount I have allocated for it, and I'm not giving you additional. And you have to kind of know that that's going to be a thing, and so you can make good decisions around, okay, this person's very, very finicky about exactly what the budget is, and they're not going to let us go over, so we're going to have to make sure that we make really, really solid, good decisions. But I make decisions based on knowing that that's not going to get approved, and that it's going to be an issue if it ever comes to head. Another thing that making good decisions plays into is comparing options and going from there. So the good thing to start with is doing either SWOT analysis or just making a rudimentary pros and cons list, as far as like, if I was to make this decision, these are all the good things that come out of it, these are all the bad things that can happen from it or are going to happen from it, and going from there. There's always a do nothing option, right? So a lot of times we as leaders, managers, and people that are just trying to like get shit done, so to speak, we just initially just kind of trigger into something has to be done to take care of something. On the few and far in certain occasions, doing nothing is actually an option and might be the best course of action. If there's a lack of communication in a certain area from a certain vendor or contractor, it's not always in the best interest because you're not getting direct communication to all of a sudden cut ties and start trying to find somebody else. They just might have been gone dark. They might have had a communication situation or issue that they haven't let you know. Or they could just be swamped, but they're going to get your job done and the work that you asked for them done in a timely manner. But doing nothing is an option. It doesn't necessarily. I know it can be very tumultuous and tough for people like myself and others that are like, okay, I can't just sit around on my thumbs and hope and do nothing and hope something great happens. or that everything's going to get done, and have faith that everyone's going to do their job. I need to be doing something. But sometimes there is. There's an include do nothing option. If I was to do nothing right now, what's the worst or best thing that can outcome from this? And then you can make an assumption or a situational choice on what's going to happen for that. For each pro and con, you can confirm that you know what you think you know. As far as you assume this type of situation is going to happen. You assume this person's going to have this knowledge base. You assume this vendor or contractor is going to do this. You want to make sure you confirm that that's actually going to be, the way it's going to be. Because if, let's say, you're assigning accountability on a certain decision and you're going to assign it to a certain subordinate or department in your organization, you want to actually confirm that they have the time, the knowledge base, and the understanding and the expertise to actually do what you're going to be asking for them. You make sure you ask tough questions as far as you grill your subordinates and your people on your staff to ensure that they're honest and truthful with you as far as their limitations, expectations, and abilities, because you want your employees and subordinates to be honest with you if something is outside of their scope or something is over their head. You want them to be able to tell you that. Be like, hey, look, you've assigned this task to me. I can do some of the basics of this. I can't go as in depth as you want with this specific part of the project, and then you'll be able to make a deviated choice of how that's going to work, whether you just pull that whole portion of that project from that employee and have somebody that's a little more tenured expertise to it. You outsource the portion of it that needs to be done to ensure that it's done accurately, correctly, and the way you need to. You just go from there. There's considering hybrid choices as far as if there's as far as finding common ground in give and take type conversations as far as what's going to be the best course of action, but also just trying to find the most mixed choices that are out there and make it work. Include relevant perspectives. So not so much like a purely technical decision may impact other goals of the project situation, but so whenever you're making and adjusting the parts of the project, you want to make sure that, like you said, you have the right people in the room so they can chime in and actually tell you if that idea is stupid, or that idea will never work, or we don't have the platforms for that, or we don't have the personnel for it, and you can't just I guess ideally bring in this hardware or software because we don't have the space for it, we don't have the memory, we don't have the platforms to actually make any of this run, things of that nature. So you want to make sure you have relevant perspectives to chime in and give you knowledge base based on whatever part of the project or change that you're trying to implement. And then a good part about making good decisions is to start on paper or whiteboard or something of that nature, so you can just generate ideas, depictions, and best practices immediately, so you can move on and go from there too. And then you just go through this process of refinement until you actually get something that's stable, makes sense, and that you can, solidify good decisions off of. Then you get into the actual decision itself, right? So I've talked about all the different figuring out all your different options and variables, figuring out all the different things that are going to go from there. Now you have to actually make the decision and decide. One of the most, I guess, understandable things is the Sherlock Holmes method, which is, if you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. A very rudimentary and very basic way of looking at that. There's another one called Occam's razor, which is a solution that, with the simplest logic, is usually the best, which is pretty much like the scientific method as well. The simplest or easiest solution typically is the most common, is going to be the better chance of it happening there. There's a reflection period of decision, which is, it's highly underrated, but it's going, taking a step back, kind of, going, working out, go for a run, taking a shower, having a cigarette, a cigar, whatever, and then coming back and then making a decision based off that. That's like if you were ingrained or entrenched into a project or a problem, and you're trying to really, really figure it out from there, and you're like, I just need some time to kind of just clear my head and come back with a fresh set of eyes and make this decision from there. You haven't slept in 2 days, things of that nature. Information, of course, is going to be a key thing for deciding. You want to pretty much use it as like a flashlight, pretty much like finding what you need to. But the one thing about a flashlight is, even if it's right, it doesn't always tell the whole story. So a lot of information can be misinterpreted. It can be skewed. It can kind of lead you down the wrong path as well. So you want to make sure the validity of what you're looking at. I'm sure I can find a lot of, I can do a research topic, and I can really skew the information by choosing the certain focal group, choosing the certain surveyors, and making it the way I want to. Also can paint certain information in a light to make it come out to showcase a certain way I want it to go. And but that's what you want to do. And then realize that some decisions are not winning choices. That's going to be your last thing. Realize that not all decisions that you're going to make are going to be the best or the right ones. So accept that and kind of go from that. Now we circumvent into, so what do we do when actually shit hits fan? What do we do when stuff goes wrong, right? And some of the fun pictures ever of crashing figure skaters, a bus going through a boat somehow, two scooters for some reason, and then somehow there's looks like a goat on the back of a person riding a bicycle. Anyway, I don't even know why it's a fail, but anyway, what do you do when something bad happens or when things actually go wrong? Okay, so things are going to go wrong. That's going to happen. Okay, so what you want to make sure to do is, now you want to think about like how things can go wrong and prepare for that portion. So how things can go wrong is that there could be an oversight or a realization that just pretty much like screws up the circumstance or decision making that's happened. There could be a circumstance where you are actually forced to do something stupid. You're actually forced to use a vendor that you don't trust. You're forced to push a time delay because of a situation. You're forced to have certain employees do a job that they know that they're not going to be the most accurate and effective at. There's a lot of situations. Most of the time it's going to happen, this a lot, is failing to schedule or a resource shortage, meaning you don't have enough people to finish it out. You don't have enough resources to make this work. Like these are things that can go wrong, and these are how it can be as detrimental to it as you want to, as you don't want to. And their quality could be super low as far as the output is definitely not up to snuff as far as what it needs to. It doesn't meet the specs. It doesn't meet the parameters or the tensions that it needs to. There could be directional changes as far as what you originally were working on has now been deviated into something else, and you want to make sure you have to make adjustments to that. There could be team and personnel issues, conflict, attrition, people getting fired for random reasons, a part of the company being dissolved, people calling out sick. There could be that kind of turmoil as well. That's these are how things can go wrong. Disagreeing and conflict, both at not just the colleague or the employee level, but also leadership, arguing about exactly the best course of action or what should happen. There could be lack of faith in the project, both at the senior executive level or the people that are making decisions from your level, and also from the subordinate level. And if there's lack of faith in the project, that could be a detrimental factor that could cause problems down the line or even through it. And then, of course, threats of mutiny. Pretty much you've pissed off your employees and subordinates so much that they pretty much just don't want to work for you anymore, and they're just finding a way out. Because you're not going to have a full mutiny. That's not a thing. This isn't a pirate ship. But you are going to have teams that pretty much turn on their leadership and kind of either work just enough so they don't get fired, or completely are difficult and always causing conflict and bitching all the time about the situation at hand. Now you get into like, okay, so those are how things can go wrong. What do you actually do when things go wrong? And the first thing I always tell and I always train to is first calm down, because you can't freak out in front of your subordinates, employees, or organization, because when you're in a leadership-based role or you're a project manager, your emotional state, your leadership mentality, your positivity, your negativity, however you are, that's going to affect the entire project and all the people that serve under you. So you have to stay calm, and present a very solid, strong, relaxed front, so not to freak out everybody else. Now, if you want to go in a broom closet later on and just scream it out, or go in your car, or go home and just like flip out and cry over whatever happened, that's perfectly fine, but you cannot break down in front of your employees ever. Because it's going to make them unsettled. It's not that it's not a pride thing. It doesn't make you look like less confident or less strong as a leader, but it does invoke a feeling of, I guess, hopelessness for your team members, thinking that either the project's like shot or that their jobs might be in jeopardy. So you want to make sure that you don't showcase that. And then also you want to make sure, then once after you calm down, you start to evaluate the problem at hand, like in relation to like the big picture of the project. Is this something that is really detrimental? Is it a big deal? Is it a minor issue that we can work around? What am I looking at? What am I going to have to try to solve? After that, calm down again. Once you start to realize either how big or minor the issue is and how much of a pain in the ass it may or may not be for you. After that, you get the right people in the room to make these decisions. Keep it small. I mean, I know hypothetically and in a perfect scenario, you want as many people as possible to give you expert opinions and to like get a systems thinking method, which means like every part of the organization is like kind of churning together. But that's not, you need a manageable number of people to make a decision, because as we see from our government officials, when it's a few hundred individuals, nothing ever really gets done, and they're never really agree on anything. But as far as if you're able to get 4 or 5, less than 10 in a room, you can have a really good discussion and a really good understanding, and you can come out with really good alternatives, possibilities, and solutions to whatever is there. Also, when you're kind of like figuring out what to do when things go wrong, you explore alternatives as far as like, okay, this is my good scenario, this is my bad scenario, this is my best scenario. And you start kind of rating them. You might have 3 scenarios or alternatives. You might have 100. Doesn't make a difference, but you're going to have a hierarchy of like good, I guess like best, good, bad, worst type situation as far as the alternatives that you can do. I mean, yeah, as far as like if you if you miss your flight, best case scenario, you're able to catch another flight immediately after it. That would be the best case scenario. A good scenario is that you'd have to like wait a few hours or maybe lay over the next day and go. A bad scenario would be that you couldn't catch another flight, and the worst case scenario is that you take a hot air balloon. But as far as that is concerned, like I said, you explore the alternatives that are there. You create the simplest plan of action to mitigate or to fix or to solve the issue. You execute it, and then after you execute it, and hopefully it solves the problem and pushes through and it's not something that's there, you debrief. And you figure out what went right, wrong, and different. Was this the best course of action? Could we have done things a little bit differently to make this smoother, more effective, more efficient? And then from there, once you get to the debrief section, you as a project manager have started to figure out, like, you start to create over time this kind of like an outline of choose your own adventure situation, where if said X situation happens, Y action is typically the best action to take, because we've seen it firsthand. And this is when I don't do this one, a certain other alternatives will cause certain issues to happen and things of that nature. And with that, we're going to move on to actually putting together. So now what I want to do is, okay, so now what I actually want to do is go over like how to do the risk mitigation matrix as far as what you go over. And I'm just going to kind of walk you through it. Like normally I do this inside of class and we kind of like banter back and forth and we go over this scenario, which we'll do in class because I love that exercise. But for the most part, because we're going to be doing this virtually and I'm going to be doing it recording wise, I'm going to just kind of feel it through. And to make it a little bit easier use of you, I'm actually going to use your scenario, which is the Tough Mudder situation that you're in. If you don't know the situation offhand, review your assignment 2, which it pretty much means that you got conned into doing a Tough Mudder run, which is a pretty extreme, long-winded, few-mile run in mud and guck and a whole bunch of other stuff. And so the mitigation matrix that we're talking about today, or for this specific scenario, is you being talked into this thing that you now have to do, and now all the risk associated with you actually going through a Tough Mudder and how you would mitigate that situation as you were going through it. So I'll just kind of go over it. So think about it for a bit, and then I'm just going to kind of we're going to go through the situation. We're just going to do 10 to make it easy and go through there. So if me personally, because this scenario specifically is to you as an individual, not a team, not a group, not anything. This is you getting talked into this situation. So you're going about this alone and preparing for it and having to do it. And so you don't have to prepare or have a proprietary worry about other people. It's going to be just you. Anyway, so back to this. So what is some of the risks? What are the risks that can happen associated with it? So one of the most ones that come up a lot is death. I always have to put it out there. There's injury, right? Some kind of injury, broken bone, a sprain, something of that nature. There's dehydration. I hope I spelled that correct. Then, death, injury, dehydration. What else? There could be an embarrassment as far as, oh, I'm so embarrassed by what has actually happened to me. I don't want to actually go on anymore because I failed so badly at it. There could be, a few other things that go into that portion of it as well. Okay, so we have a list. I have started a list of rudimentary things that could potentially happen to you, and then we're going to work through kind of the severity, probability, and how we're going to mitigate it. So with death being the first risk that I put out there, what is the worst that can happen? You die, right? I die. That's the worst that can happen. The severity of that, if we were doing a 1 to 5 scale, which you can adjust the scales from 1 to 10, 1 to 5, depending on whatever it means to you. But for the most part, and for this scenario, we're doing a 1 to 5 just to keep it simple. And your risk matrix that you'll be downloading from the file section, it's available on your Canvas, is a 1 to 5 scale. So I'm pretty sure you guys would all agree that it's going to be a 5, right? Dying is pretty much a 5. The probability of you dying, probably fairly low, depending on your health and the portion of it that you're prepared for. So we're going to say like 1. Like, it's not going to be a probability that's happen. Is there anything that you're actually going to do about it? Like, to not die, probably train and prepare, right? Something of that nature. When are you going to do that? That'll be before the race. And then the severity after mitigation, right? That won't change. Okay? You can't always change out the severity, but you can adjust the probability, right? So something like death, the severity is always going to be a 5. It's always going to be like the top right, because there's no like mitigating the severity of death. It's not a worse or better death, so to speak. But the probability will stay there. So the probability will probably still stay a 1 in this case because of that nature. Now, if you're severely out of shape or have high blood pressure or something like that, your probability of dying might go up a little bit. And then, training, preparing, medicating, that might put the probability a little bit low. All right, let's move on to the next one. So just a general injury. A broken bone, a sprain, a twisted ankle, something of that nature that's, hurts you. So what's the worst that can happen? You're pretty much, debilitated or severely hurt. So really hurt, right? It's the severity of being really hurt. We probably would assume is also still like another 5 because it's not death, but it also is going to be a severe thing that might stop you from actually going through it. The probability of injury before, if you were coming right off the street, probably kind of a little bit higher as far as like a 3, right? Now, what are you going to do about it? You can do the same things as far as like train, prepare, stretch, whatever, right? Stretch. Something of that nature. Just being like warmed up, etc. And then when are you gonna do that? Again, that would be another before the race type situation because you're going to be prepared for it. Now, the severity will still probably stay the same because it is a severe thing, but we might be able to mitigate the probability down to like, let's say a 2 or a 1. Let's just say 1 for fun's sake. And then there's like, we just keep going. So death and injury are 2 very prevalent and very, I guess, high versions of risks that can happen. You get someone like dehydration, right? Which, if you get severely dehydrated, you may die. But in reality's sake, if you get dehydrated doing some kind of a running or physical activity, a lot of times it just can cause cramping and discomfort, and you might have to stop the actual thing. So what's the worst that can happen? Cramping and or stopping the race, right, for yourself. That's the worst that can happen. And then the severity. Now, it's not death and it's not a severe injury, but it still would hinder you from stopping. So let's say we'll just drop it down to like a 4 just to mitigate it a bit. The probability of dehydration happen, It can. I mean, if you don't prepare for it, it could be a possible, let's say, like 3. And said, what are you going to do to prepare for that? Hydrate, bring water, etc. Right? And then when are you going to do that? That would be before and during the race. It's not something that you can just prepare for. You also do need to be like doing it during the competition as well to ensure that you don't have dehydration or cramping of that nature. The severity will probably still stay the same because if it happens, it could be worse. But the probability could potentially go down to like 1 because you're prepared for it, right? And then embarrassment. You just should so badly that you just look terrible, right? What's the worst that can happen with that? Pride is hurt, which in some cases might be worse than death. For some, the severity of that, depending on your mental health state, but I would probably rate that a little bit lower as far as like your pride's kind of hurts. I know it's a 2. It's not physical, debilitating. The probability of that actually happening, if you don't do anything mitigation-wise to get embarrassed, might be a good high probability of that actually happening. So what are you going to do to not be embarrassed? Besides just kind of coaching yourself to be okay with failing at this, is not to fail. Like, if you prepare and train for it, and be, to ensure that you don't look terrible and get embarrassed by it, and you do that before the race starts, right? The severity will still probably stay the same as far as that, but the probability of it now goes down significantly to like 2 because that goes from there. And so this is the exercise that you do to build through that portion of it, right? So you just kind of do that, right? You start setting up exactly all the things that can happen via risk. What's the worst that can happen with that specific risk? The severity ranging from a 1 to 5 scale. Probability of it, this is before any mitigation, any preparation, any preemptive strikes has occurred, and then going from that, and what are you going to do about it? When are you going to get it done? The risk and mitigation that happens from it, portions of it. And you just kind of go through there. So let's kind of think a little bit more, and maybe I'll add some more as we kind of go through. So there's like death, injury, dehydration, embarrassment. Think about some other bad things or things that can happen from, or risks that are associated with a Tough Mudder. And it doesn't have to be extravagant. It could be things of that, like, my shoes get muddy. Shoes get ruined. Which, on a physical scale and going off of death, dehydration, and injury, like shoes getting ruined is not the worst thing in the world, but it could be something that's a risk, right? You're running around in mud and a whole bunch of randomness and people that you're wearing shoes that you like. You don't want to get them ruined. You want to actually have them after that day, which, knowing people have done in Tough Mudders, that those shoes are shot after that day, so just throw them in the trash. But let's say you don't want them to be ruined, right? So what's the worst that can happen? Your shoes are trash, right? They're full of mud and dirt, and the severity of that is going to be kind of low. I mean, it's not going to be death, but it might piss you off because you have a really nice pair of shoes that you actually ruined. Probability of it is going to be high because you're running through mud. What are you going to do about it? You can, wear bags on your feet. No, wear over shoes, right? Just like you prepare, like tape them, whatever you can possibly do to try to like make sure that it's not a situation. Bring shitty shoes or a backup pair of shoes. When would you do that? That's going to be probably, that's going to be before and during the race. And then the severity would probably still stay the same because your shoes are there, but the probability might be able to go down to like a 4 because it's still high probability that you're going to ruin your shoes. And there could be, I'm trying to think of others, because it's been a while since I've gone through it, but it could, you want to just kind of like, that's the exercise that you work through. So when it comes down to your specific personal Tough Mudder assignment, you're going to create a list of about 10 of these, and you're just going to kind of work through them and make it work that way. And so with that, I'll just kind of give you a rundown of the assignment as well. So let me close this out real quick. Alright, so this is the assignment at hand, right? Assignment 2, oh no, you've been talked into doing a Tough Mudder. And so what you're gonna create for me is you're gonna make a gold card. That's the standard for pretty much every assignment. Just get prepared. You're gonna make it a gold card for like every single one of these assignments. And refresh your memory what a gold card is. It's got the who are your stakeholders, your customers, the problem you're trying to solve, the scope, the cost, and the time that are associated with the project. All right, they're all high-level kind of objectives and setups that are going to go off of that. Anyway, back at it. You're going to create a risk assessment that we just went through as far as a rudimentary tool. Like I say, you just click on it, it'll open right up, and you just take it from there as far as what the metrics tool is going to look like here. All right. And it goes over the same exact stuff we just went to, and then it's going to actually build you out a little risk matrix stamp card, so to speak, or like a severity little stamp, where all the risks that you're associated with is going to fit up in this grid. Not a huge, I don't require the grid portion of it, I mostly just want this outline, but that's what you're going to be submitting to me through there. All right. Okay, and then also what you're going to do is you're going to create a WBS that will be included in your mitigation plan. So today specifically, I want to go over the risk matrix tool. Next class, we're going to discuss work breakdown structures in WBS. I'm going to build you out and go through one of those as well, so that way you know exactly what that type of situation is going to look at. But for the first part, I want you to focus on the risk metrics, and then after that, when we come back on Thursday, we're going to talk specifically about work breakdown structures and how to formulate them, put them together, and the various uses and ways of putting those and making them work. But besides that, I hope you have a great Tuesday, and I'll see you back on Thursday, your College Friday, and then I'll physically see you next week.